Hi guys, welcome back. We were in a bit of a rush I wanted to start the video clip last time we were together to make sure you saw the 17 minutes I wanted you to see, so I rushed through just a little bit of the Italian campaign, and I wanted to go back and just give you about 90 seconds worth of that Italian campaign. And so you've already written these notes, Bloody Anzio and Tuskegee Airmen and things like that, but I did want to give you a few details to add. So you've seen some of this already. Even before the battle in North Africa was won, Roosevelt and Churchill, as you already know, were meeting in Casablanca in Morocco with their commanders, and at this meeting they decided they were only going to accept unconditional surrender. The two leaders also discussed where they were going to strike next. Many Americans were arguing the best approach was to assemble that mass invasion fleet in Britain, which they are going to keep planning. Churchill, however, thought it'd be safer to first attack Italy, and so that's what they decide to do. You guys already know that Stalingrad is going on at the same time, 1.1 million to 250,000 lives lost there. The Italian campaign, as it started to get going, got off to a good start. This is the island of Sicily right here, and Sicily it collapsed fairly quickly, and the Italian government, as soon as Sicily collapsed, forced Benito Mussolini to resign. Mussolini was also called Il Duce, which means the leader in Italian. So the king called Mussolini to his palace, stripped him from power, and ordered for him to be arrested. Told Mussolini at the time that he was the most hated man in all of Italy, and Italians were already celebrating at that point. But their cheers were premature because Hitler decided that he wasn't going to let those allies just march right through Italy. And so, one of the hardest battles the Allies encountered in Europe was fought less than 40 miles from Rome. So this battle, Bloody Anzio, lasted 4 months, until the end of May 1944, and left about 25,000 Allies and 30,000 Axis casualties. During the year after Anzio, German armies continued to put up strong resistance in the north. The effort to free Italy didn't succeed until 1945, when Germany was close to collapse. Now moving on to today. Okay, when we left off, you were watching the Saving Private Ryan clip that talked about D-Day, and so under Eisenhower's direction in England, the Allies were in the process of gathering a force of nearly 3 million British, American, and Canadian troops. Together with mountains of military equipment and supplies, Eisenhower planned to attack Normandy in north of France. To keep their plans secret, the Allies had set up a huge phantom army with its own headquarters and equipment. In fact, I'm going to show you that image right now because it's kind of interesting, this stuff. So this area right here between Dover and Calais, when they were planning Operation Overlord, which is the more official term for D-Day, they set up this big phantom army that looked as if it was going to attack here at Calais. Makes sense. It's the shortest distance across the English Channel, which, if you don't know anything about the English Channel, it's really choppy. On D-Day itself, they were facing like 9-foot waves. It was pretty difficult conditions. And they delayed it a day to wait for better conditions, and still they were facing like 9-foot swells on that day. So they set up this big phantom army right here at Calais and drew some of the German forces off right here. So the place where they did end up landing was a little less heavily fortified. To keep their plans a secret, the Allies set up that huge phantom army with its own headquarters and equipment, and in radio messages they knew the Germans could read, the Allied commanders sent orders to make believe the army was going to attack that French port of Calais, about 150 miles north of where the English Channel, where they actually were going to cross the English Channel. As a result, Hitler ordered his generals to keep a large army at Calais, and that helped a bit. The Allied invasion, codenamed Operation Overlord, was originally set for June 5th, but bad weather forced the delay. Banking on a forecast of clear skies, Eisenhower gave the go-ahead for D-Day. So on June 6th of 1944, the first day of the invasion, and shortly after midnight, 3 divisions parachuted down behind enemy lines. These parachuters carried with them, they carried with them a lot of different things, but one of the things they carried are these little chirpers. They wanted something that they could use to communicate and find each other, but that would sound enough like nature that that they wouldn't give themselves away. So these people that parachuted in behind lines had these little chirpers. Now, some of this stuff that happened behind enemy lines went smoothly, and some did not. Shortly after midnight, 3 divisions parachuted behind enemy lines, and they were followed in the early morning hours by thousands upon thousands of seaborne soldiers. The largest land-sea-air operation in Army history. Despite the massive air and sea bombardment by the Allies, the German retaliation was brutal, particularly on Omaha Beach. Now, Gold Juno and Sword Beach, remember the British had command over these areas here, and the United States had generally the command over the Utah and the Omaha beaches. German retaliation was especially brutal. Some words from the people that were actually there. People were yelling, screaming, dying, running on the beach. Equipment was flying everywhere. Men were bleeding to death, crawling, lying everywhere. Fire came from all directions. These were the words of a soldier named Felix Branham. We dropped behind anything that was the size of a golf ball for cover. Before we move on, I just want to tell you a little bit about this. So they even planned out these prefabricated barriers. I'll read you a little bit about that. In order to accommodate the vast number of invading ships, the armies built these 2 enormous concrete ports, towed them to Gold Beach on the French coast on D-Day, and then sank about 70 old ships to create a breakwater for the artificial harbor so that they could create, a stilled location for the supplies to land. And when the supplies landed, I'll give you those numbers in just a minute, it was pretty incredible. Okay, back to this. Despite heavy casualties, the Allies held the beachheads. After 7 days of fighting, the Allies held an 80-mile strip of France, and within a month, they had landed 1 million troops, 567,000 tons of supplies, 170,000 vehicles. On July 25th, General Omar Bradley unleashed a massive air and land bombardment against the enemy at St-Lô. It provided a gap in the German line of defense, and through that gap streamed George Patton, who you already know a little bit about. Remember, he created these kind of divisions using the tank. So Patton punches through that bulge that Omar Bradley creates and heads straight for Paris. So Patton and the Third Army reached the Seine, just south of Paris, on August 23rd. So within a month and a half of that initial invasion, they are in Paris. 2 days later, the French resistance had risen up inside of Paris, and American troops joined with them and liberated the French capital, and it had been 4 years of German occupation at that point. The Parisians were delirious with joy. Patton announced this joyous event to his commander in a message that read, "Dear Ike, today I spat in the sign." By September of 1944, the Allies had freed France and Belgium and Luxembourg, and this was good news, and the American people's desire not to change horses midstream helped to elect Franklin D. Roosevelt to an unprecedented 4th term in November, along with his new running mate, Senator Harry S. Truman. A little bit about Eisenhower, who is not, his picture's not on the screen, but just a little bit. First of all, he's born in 1890, dies in 1969. When Army Chief of Staff General George Marshall, who you should remember, chose modest Lieutenant General Dwight David Eisenhower to become the Supreme Commander of U.S. forces in Europe, he knew what he was doing. Ike was a superb planner. He possessed a keen mind for military tactics. But more importantly, Eisenhower had an uncommon ability to work with all kinds of people. Competitive people, temperamental allies. After VE Day, a grateful Marshall wrote to Ike saying, "You have been selfless in your actions, sound and tolerant in your judgments, and altogether admirable in the courage and wisdom of your military decisions. You have made history, great history for the good of mankind." In 1953, of course, Dwight Eisenhower would become President of the United States, and everybody would also like him there, where he would be referred to as Ike, and his commercials would, they would be the very first cartoon commercials, actually. Little babies with balloons singing, "I like Ike, I like Ike, everybody likes Ike, bum bum bum." I'll show you that later. I'm sure that made your Friday, me singing that little tune for you. Last piece for today is the Battle of the Bulge. October of 1944, Americans captured their very first German town, Aachen, which, by the way, is where Charlemagne's castle is. Very cool. Hitler responded with a desperate last gap offensive, so he places all of his energy in one last attempt. He ordered his troops to break through Allied lines and move to recapture a Belgian port of Antwerp. This was a really bold move, and the Fuhrer hoped it was going to disrupt the enemy's supply lines and demoralize the Allies. On December 16th, under cover of dense fog, 8 German tank divisions broke through a weak point in American defenses along an 80-mile front. Hitler hoped that a victory would split American and British forces and break up Allied supply lines. Tanks drove 60 miles into Allied territory, creating this big bulge in the lines that gave this last kind of desperate, last-ditch effort its name, the Battle of the Bulge. As the Germans swept westward, they captured about 120 GIs near Malmedy. Elite German troops, the SS troopers, herded these prisoners into a large field and mowed them down with machine guns. The battle raged on for a month, but when it was over, the Germans had been pushed back, and little seemed to have changed. But in fact, events had taken a decisive turn. The Germans had lost 120,000 troops, 600 tanks, assault guns, 1,600 planes in the Battle of the Bulge, and soldiers and weapons at this point could not be replaced by Germany. From that point on, the Nazis could do little but retreat. I don't believe that this is... Nope, I'm not going to show you that. Darn it. Hang on.
During the Bulge, command broke down, supplies broke down, morale broke down, communications broke down, everything broke down. It was every man for himself. We were inadequately clothed. We didn't have rubber overshoes. We didn't have overcoats. We didn't have gloves. We didn't have scarves. My boots were so bad, I would strip newspapers and drapery off of the bombed out houses and wrap my feet in it. You were having trouble breathing because the snow was suffocating you. And consequently, we lost a lot of men who froze to death.